Lecture, what I'm using is I'm using Stack Bliss. First of all, this is not the promotional video. I'm not doing any promotion, but it is just sick for the simplicity. I'm using this online code editor, and the advantage is like it does all the configuration level initial setup for you, whatever required to run a React project. So I can only focus on the part, or only focus on the piece I wanted to show you, I wanted to discuss with you. So in this example, I have taken two component. Basically, one is called as a parent app.js, another one is called as a child.js. And the child, if you look at the child.js, it is pretty much simpler. It is pretty much simple. It just receives something as a part of props, and it return backs on click of some events. So we have a two element basically wrapped inside a div. The one is the, we call it as a child component, which printed the number received as a part of props, and on click of button we are just making sure whatever received as a part of the set number, we are calling it back. So we can just simply say this way also good, but I have wrapped inside another function, so this is up to you. So I've named it as a child button. In, if you look at into the app.js, at the line number 4 I have a constant array which have fixed values. Inside this parent component I have two variable, local state and child component state. The first one is used for updating the state on the parent side, and the second one is used to have all the updated values done from the child component side. So if you look at the line number 21 to 24, this child component state is getting passed to this child component as a part of props, and we are passing the increment child state callback to the child component to on click of child button handler. At the line number 25 we have a parent component which just printed the state which is local to the parent one, and we have a button in this parent component, we called it as a parent button. And at the last, at the line number 27, we have a largest number which is printing the max number from the array. So without wasting a time, let's go back to the web page and we'll see how it works now. I'm going to reload this web page so you can understand how actually it works during its initial phase, during its initial rendering. So if you look at the console, I'm getting two information basically. One is from getLargest function and another one is from child component. What does it mean is I have added some log to identify which one is getting called during the initial rendering, So that is fine because this is the first time, so each and every component has to be re-rendered, or basically I would say each and every component has to be rendered, and all the computation, all the code execution should happen now. Let's do something on this button side. I'll just click on the child button. This child component is getting called. Okay. So inside this app.js, I have a constant array with some fixed values. We have a parent component having two state, one local state and child component state as name suggested. In this app.js, we have a array with the constant values and we have a parent component defined. This parent component is having two values. We can call it as a state, the local state and child component state. Local state is meant for this parent component and child component state is used to pass or get the values from child component. So basically this is for having all the data done or updated by child component. So if you look at the render part or the render function, basically we are wrapping the child component inside a div. We have a h1 tag which printed the local state value, whatever we make changes here. There's a button beneath the h1 tag which updated the local state using this callback or using this function. At the bottom we have a largest number and its name is it is a function basically, so I would call it as a function. This function is taking the max value from the array. So let me take you to the web page and let's see what happens, how it works. So if I reload it from the beginning, I get two messages on the console. One is getLargest function or child component rendering has been done. So That is fine because this is the initial rendering, and it has to be done in the same way. But what if I click on the child button or parent button? Let's give it a try. If I click on the parent button, this from largest function or child component is getting called. That is somewhat true because we are forcing parent component to update the state, or update its value, which forces child component and largest function to re-render. But if I click on the child button, it is unnecessary calling largest function because child button is only meant to update its state using help of parent component. So what it means is, so if I look at the whole component, if I click on child button or parent button, the parent button is unnecessary calling the child component and the largest number. Similarly, child component child button click is unnecessary calling the largest number function. So first issue is in the both part is largest number. So as I said in the beginning during the introduction, I've said I'll be working on the useMemo and useCallback. So what is the difference between those two? The syntax wise both are same, and those two are used to memorize something, memorize piece of functions basically. And the syntax looks like it accept two arguments. First one as a callback, another one is the dependency array. So if you look at this one, so React use callback or React use memo basically looks like this one. Okay, and the second argument as a dependency array. If you look at this function, we don't rely on any other dependencies because array is constant, or it doesn't need any dynamic data, or it doesn't dependent on any other state or any other value. So what we have said to the memo that we don't need any dependency, so we passed it as an empty array. There's a slight difference between use memo and use callback. The way of this function returns the values. The one use memo returns only values after the execution, while use callback always return the function reference. Okay, so let's start with the initial step of fixing the issue number one, having the largest number. As I said, use memo return value is always a value, so we cannot call this 27 as a function. So if you look at this, it is complaining about largest number is not a function, as is returns a value. So what it means, I can use it as a value now. I cannot invoke it as a function. If I change it back to the value, it will start working. So this is initial setup first of all. So for the first time get largest function is getting called, that is true. But if I click on the parent button or child button, that is fixed now. It is not getting unnecessary call because it is static one, it has to be called only once. So that we have fixed. But if I click on the parent button so many times, ideally it should update its value to the parent component, or maybe it should update to the state only, but it's unnecessary updating the child component. So let's take a look at the code what we have written here. What we have written here is, on click of button we are updating only local state, but unnecessary this child component is getting called, even if this child component does not rely on this local state. So technically the child component should not dependent upon the changes of local state. So what we can do that, there are two ways to do it. First, either we can wrap this rendering as a part of useMemo, and the second is we can make the changes here to make it memoized. So what is happening, let's go into detail more. Let's go into detail why these things are happening. When you say on click, then what happens, the state is getting changed, which forces parent component to start re-rendering. Start re-rendering means it will start from here to there end, and which means when it comes to line number 12, this reference is getting changed because this is an anonymous function, named function with the anonymous reference. So every time when the re-rendering happening, the increment child state references is getting changed, which forces child component to re-render. So what could be the best way? The best way to change is, we can say react dot use callback. We have it here now, and the second argument as a number, because this increment child state from callback or function does not depend upon any other variable, so we can pass the dependency as a empty array. Now if you go back to the web page and if you try to click here, the child component is still rendering. Okay, so can you figure out why this is still rendering? Still the problem is still there. The set number is getting called every time. So what could be the possible reason for this one? Okay, let me tell you. So let me tell you again the same step. The line number 10 is getting recalculated. The reference for this entire child component is forcefully getting changed. So even we have this increment child state to be memoized one, but still it forcing complete render function to be called. So there's one way to do it. Either you do something into the parent component or you memoize the child component itself. Okay, so there's a way to do it when we call it. If you look at the class component or before the 16.8, in the class we have a pure function, so we need to make the child component somewhat as a pure function. So either way is doing it. You can just wrap it this child component into another high order function called memo, and if you go here and click on the parent button, nothing will happen. This is the first way. Second way is just you memoized everything on the parent side, like this number, which will tell not to change the references or not to forcefully call the render function. So what we can do is we can say react dot use callback, this one. So but the drawback here is having this type of use callback, you will not have the local state value always updated here. Okay, so you can memoize this, but it will still point to the always to the old local state value. So what could be the best way to do it? Let's try to fix it using the parent one. So what I'll do is I'll create a new basically memoized version of node. I'll say child element, and I will say react useMemo, and I will return everything from here to there, child component, and I will call this child element as a value here, and I will pass this child component as a state to increment child state. So I have memoized this one. I don't need to call it memo. There's a one way that I told you. You can use the react memo high order component, or you can use this child component to memoized value, and it can be used inside the render function. I have passed these two dependency and instructed this useMemo function to be only changed when either change child component state is getting changed or the callback reference is getting changed. And we have already made it memoized. This reference is already memoized, so it's like, you know, complete memoization of child component using the callback or using the useMemo. I was talking about this part. What is the disadvantage? If I try to do this way, and if I pass this, you know, if I don't pass the local state here, what will happen? The first time it will work, the second time I won't be having the local state value because I am not getting the updated dependency here. Let's take an example here. For example, if I click parent button, nothing is happening, but let's give it a try. Okay, so why this is happening? Because the first thing, if you look at this here, I have printed the local state, but this local state inside this callback, we are using the local state. The first time when it get initialized, the local state value is known to this one, which is 0. But the second time, we are not relying on the local state object changes, which does mean is it always point to 0 1. So from the hook side, if nothing is changing, then we don't need to change its internal code. So what does it mean is local state value for this use callback is always 0. So how can we fix that? We need to pass this into the dependency array to make sure we are getting the updated values whenever it is getting changed. So this way we can use callback and use memo in the effective way, and we can optimize the function in the effective way. I hope you like this video. You understand now completely how you can use memo and use callback in the better way, and what are the differences between these two, the syntax wise, the code wise, how can you make your React application more performant. And that is all for today. If you have any question, please share me in the comment box. I'll try to catch up you in the next session. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.